This is Mandy Rawlins on Tuesday, the 12th of February, just after 11 a.m. 2019. Can you tell me your name and a little bit about yourself?
Oh, right. I was born, I'm Mary Laflin now, but I was born Mary Gathercole, and I lived in Plough Lane, Lakenheath, was now part of Mill Road. My father was Clement and mother Mildred, and I was there for 2.5 years, and then we moved on to Wings Road, Lakenheath, where my father built the house. He couldn't afford bricks, so they were brickbats, which were half bricks, and we had no water, so he had to dig a well, and he went down every night by lantern digging this and lining it with bricks. He was lowered down in the bucket till he got down to the water, and we had no electricity, only downstairs, so I had to go to bed with a candle every night, which wasn't very nice. And we had the toilet outside with a bucket, which was not very nice because in the night I had to go out there, and the adjoining shed was the coal shed with rats scuffling about. And once a week we had a gentleman come with a tractor and a tank to empty this bucket before everyone was up. That was about 5 in the morning, and they said he had no sense of smell, which was a good idea. Bread was delivered by horse and cart from Baker Hammond's, and milk was horse and cart from Mr. Cook. He had his own herd of cows, so the milk was fresh, which it had to be because we had no refrigerators in those days.
What did your parents do?
Father was a master builder, Gathercole and sergeants, and undertakers. And in later years, after the war, maybe it was before the war, a local man, Mr. Drew, used to conduct the funerals, and he had a head cart which he had to pull up himself with the coffin on to the cemetery. And when it came back, if the children were coming out of school, they jumped on the cart and had a ride down Wings Road.
Did you have any brothers and sisters?
No, until I was almost 17, and then my sister Kathleen was born. But unfortunately, she was killed by a drink driver when she was 35. So I lost my sister.
Did you have any pets as a child?
Oh, I had a lovely Newfoundland dog. I loved Newfoundlands, they're my favourites, and that was my companion. I was 3 when my father bought her, and he called her Risk because they used to risk their lives saving people. They loved water because they got webbed feet, so my father thought he'll try her out, and he pretended to be drowning, and she dragged him out of the local load, Lakenheath.
Can you tell me about your life during your childhood? Was it a happy time?
Yes, it was, but it could be a bit lonely at times. But I was happy when I went to school at 4 because then I was with other children. And yeah, that was a good time until the war came.
Tell me about your education. Did you go to school in the village? Did you
I
like
just
it?
went to primary school. Yes, I was happy there. That's the only time the school I went to, and I was 14 when I left because that was the age we had to leave.
Did you wear a uniform?
No uniform, and we just had to move up into different classes, and you know, till standard 1 was first, the infants, and in the afternoon we had to have probably quarter of an hour or a bit more after dinner. It was dinner time, and we had to lay on a camp bed for a rest.
Can you remember what your dinner lunches were like?
Well, I came home because I lived near the school, so I came home every dinner time because we called it dinner in those days.
Did you have to take time off because of the farming calendar, like in harvest time? Or were you at school all year?
No, I didn't take any time off.
Do you have any standout memories of your time at school? Any particular friends?
I used, one thing I remember at school, we had a school teacher who used to, Miss Moore, she used to come up to the school on a sit up and beg bike with a basket full of books, and we had to take turns in standing in the porch waiting for her to arrive. She would jump off her bike and gave us the books, and we had to take them into the class for her. We felt like saluting. Yeah, I loved school. I was sad when I left school because I liked it and I didn't want to leave at 14, but I had to. But one thing I didn't like was when I was little there and we had this big black stove. Well, we had to have milk every day, and these little bottles of milk would come in for the children. And when it was winter time, they would stand the milk all the way round this stove to take the chill off it. And it was horrible. You know, we didn't really like it at all. And another thing, we had to practice what would happen if there was an air raid, and we had to go into the cloakroom because the windows all had this protective, they sprayed something on the windows to stop them, to make them just shatter rather than, you know, fall. And we used to have to sit there with our backs to the window, up to close to the wall, with the gas masks on, and they were hot and smelly, and we didn't have to sit there with these gas masks on, but that is one thing we had to do, so we knew what we'd got to do if there was an air raid during the wartime, during the day.
Did you have any air raids while you were at school?
No, not during, that would be night time, not during the day, no.
So when there were air raids and you were at home, where did you go to seek
Father
shelter?
built a dugout in a backyard, and that had 4 feet of concrete on the top and a little room going downstairs, all concrete, no windows of course, had electric light there, and we had a drain pipe going out, so that if we were trapped down there, food could be passed down to us. And we also had this great big rubber plug to go in to stop any possible gas coming down. And when there was an air raid, we had to go across the yard and down there, and the neighbours would join us, and sometimes they would say, "Oh, look, there's a German plane," and the searchlight from Maid's Cross Hill would pick up this silver plane, but I was frightened. I didn't like that, so we had to get down there quickly, and we had a couple of bunks so I could sleep down there. And when the raid was over, if I was asleep, my mother and the neighbours would all go back to the house, leave me down there. Now I suffer from claustrophobia. I think that's what.
How was life in Lakenheath different to today?
Well, mostly it was what I remember as a child was from 7 until I was 13. It was the wartime, and so that was didn't have oranges and bananas and those sort of fruit which had to be imported. Father used to grow tomatoes in his big glass house, so if I went for a picnic with my friend, I had a bottle of water, bread and margarine and tomatoes dipped in salt, which was a luxury. We used to love that, and because the RAF were at Lakenheath and they used to go on Operation Bomb Germany, and I remember me and my friend Daphne, we would go up the Warren and watch these planes take off early evening and wave to them. I hoped they would come back, but a lot of them didn't, and many of them crashed on landing, and my father was leading fireman at Lakenheath, so he attended the crashes, and it was sad really. And the planes all had a letter on their tail, like N for nuts, V for Victor, A for Abel, and so forth, identifying them. But it was very sad times. And sometimes on a Thursday, when I was home from school for my dinner, the German plane would come over very, very low, called hedgehopping. He was so low I could see the pilot in the cockpit, and he was taking photographs so that they could come back at night and bomb the area. And at Lakenheath, they had a dummy aerodrome which was several miles east of the Lakenheath RAF, and they had runways and wooden aeroplanes. And what they used to do when there was a plane in the area, they would switch on the landing lights and then quickly switch them off again, making out they made a mistake. Of course, the German would bomb that, which they bombed the dummy one rather than the real one. And another thing about my dog, she knew a German plane because we had Wellingtons and Halifax and Lancasters, because we had 3 aerodromes here, one at Feltwell, one at Mildenhall and Lakenheath. And if a German plane came over, my dog would bark, but she would never ever bark at the RAF. So how did she know? It was amazing. She knew that was a German, enemy, because my dad always got the red alert come through on our telephone, but Risk would bark before the alert had come through. She knew.
I've been told there's a very interesting story about 2 Italian prisoner of wars and your father, which you might be able to tell me about.
Oh yes, there was a Victoria camp at on the road towards Barton Mills, where the Italian prisoners were. There was another camp at Ely. Well, they would come into Lakenheath to work on the agriculture and farms and things like that. And every morning, a double-decker bus full of Italian prisoners would come up Wiggins Road and go past my house while I was a little girl, and I would jump out of bed every morning at 8 o'clock and wave to these prisoners, and they all waved back at me, and they got to look for this little girl at the window. And my father said if I overslept and didn't get out of bed, they all looked disappointed, and they would stand all the way up the double deck up the stairs. Well, one day my mother's stepfather worked at the chalk farm, which was up on Maids Cross Hill, and that is where the prisoners worked. So one day my mother took me up there to see my step-grandfather, and the prisoners all crowded round me and said, "Ah, the prisoner's little friend," and they made a fuss of me, and they recognised me. And I think that's because they remembered their children they'd left behind in Italy.
How did the war affect you personally?
Well, we coped, actually. It was a case we had to make the most of it, but a lot of us were lucky because living in the country we could, grow our own vegetables, and they called it digging for victory. So we had chickens would lay eggs, but we had to preserve them. We had a water glass in a bucket, and then we'd put the eggs in there, and that would preserve them. But we were fortunate, really, and we managed.
So I understand you might have seen a plane come down.
Yes, well, there were so many come down, but one Sunday night, because I used to go to the Methodist chapel with Mum and Dad, Father was called out because a plane had gone down, and that had gone down in where the cricket pitches or around about that area. That was just taken off from the RAF aerodrome, but it didn't make it, and that went down. So Father had to go, and then after the chapel's finished, Mother walked me up to where the plane was all burning, and I didn't like seeing that. I was frightened, so I wanted to go. And she said, "Oh, stand still, stop." I had to stand and watch it, knowing my father was there, and all the crew got out bar one, but he'd broken his back and they couldn't get him out. But that was frightening.
So what was life like as a teenager in Lakenheath? Did you have many responsibilities? Did you think about the future? What did your parents expect from you?
What did my parents
expect from you? What did they want you to become?
Well, when I left school, I had to work for my father. He wanted me to work on his market garden. I would like to have gone out and been more independent, but my father wanted me to work there, so I did. And we used to grow flowers, strawberries, tomatoes, and in the season, when it was really busy in the summer, I would have to get up at 4:15 in the morning and go out and pick flowers, put them in, bunch them up, put them in water, and then later in the afternoon pack them in boxes ready to be collected for market in London. But when the market was very, very poor, we used to send them to Coventry, which meant getting them down the Lakenheath station on a train. So my father had a trolley made to go behind my bicycle, and the most I took was 16 boxes at once, and had to cycle to Lakenheath station, panicking in case the train went across the fens before I got there. And that was just an ordinary cycle with no gears to help or anything. But it was hard, but we did it.
And what did you do for fun?
Well, I was lieutenant of the Girl Guides, so I was occupied with that as well.
Will you tell me a little bit about the village itself of Lakenheath? Where did most of the people work?
Most of them worked down Sedge Fen or Burnt Fen. Agriculture, worked on the land mainly. And my father originally worked on the land, and he used to cycle to work early mornings when it was dark and come home at night and that would be dark, so he didn't see the village in daylight until the weekend.
What crops were grown locally? What was the local agriculture?
Well, it was corn and potatoes, and they had a lot of strawberries in the fen as well, and chicory and sugarbeet, all those type of things.
And who did the cooking in your house?
Mother. Yes, she never went out to work. She was always there.
Do you have any favourite recipes or memories or things that she made that you loved?
One of my memories, which I've got in my little book, was during the wartime when occasionally there would be some sugarbeet which had dropped off the tractor on the trailer. Father would pick them up, bring them home, and they would boil them, because we didn't have electric coppers in those days. We had a copper in the shed where you lit the fire, and I used to have to light the fire and stand back, because as soon as I started, a mouse would run out, and I didn't like that. But he boiled up these sugarbeet and boiled and boiled and boiled, and then eventually they turned into syrup, which was lovely. It tasted like maple syrup. So Mother used to use that for cooking. She would make these lovely sponge puddings. She would use the syrup for sweetening, because sugar was rationed, and also pour it over, and we called them sugarbeet puddings, and they were lovely. That was one thing I really enjoyed.
And life in the village, did you think there was a strong sense of community?
Yes, there was in those days, yes.
Did people mix together? What did they do?
Well, there used to be a lot of dances in the village hall with the RAF, and then later the Land Army started here, and the girls all came and worked on the land, because most of the young men had gone to war. So that was one of the main things they had.
So when you were older, you joined the Women's Institute. Can you tell me more about that?
Do you know, I can't remember too much about that. Yes, I did when my 3 children were small. I used to go there, and we enjoyed it. We always had a speaker, and we always sang Jerusalem every time. But and then in 1965, I think I think they were celebrating 50 years. We did this scrapbook all about the village, and I had a little brownie camera, and I went round the village photographing all the shops and places of interest, the school and all those kind of things. And we also did a a big tablecloth, and we signed our our names on, and then they were embroidered, and that was used for the cover of the scrapbook, which is now in Bury St Edmunds Records Office.
Do you remember when there were Americans arriving in the village?
I don't remember the actual time they arrived, but that was towards the latter part of the war. But they were very friendly, and the children used to shout to them, "Any gum, chum?" because they used to have this chewed gum and hand it to the children. So I can remember that.
And there's been Americans living in the area
Ever since.
And what
Yeah,
impact do you think that's had with the village?
It affected us because many girls married Americans, and they left the village, and some of them never came back, and still in America. And so many of my friend Daphne, she married an American, her sister Jean married an American, and Shirley married an American. So there's 3 girls from one family. And another family living near us, the Rolfs, they had 2 daughters. They both went to America, so we lost so many of our young girls. But then again, the Land Army came here, and they married a lot of our local boys, so yeah, that replaced the girls that left the village. That brought new blood.
I see that you're a member of a drama group.
Yes.
And you played Marigold, Princess Marigold in The Sleeping Beauty. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Oh, yes. I enjoyed the drama, and originally I used to always play the clown part, like the dames and all the silly one, Dame Dolly Diddlem and that type of thing. And one year I was Professor Plonk, the music master, and I had a beard and dressed in dreadful clothes. Well, a friend who was in the drama with me, her family used to always come down every year to see our pantomimes. And when they knew they were going to do Sleeping Beauty, they asked my friend, "Who is going to be Sleeping Beauty?" She said, "Plonk." They said, "Oh no." They thought it was dreadful. This weird person was going to be Plonk. But I proved them wrong, because that was the first time I was able to play a really nice young lady, and I really enjoyed that, and that was lovely. And my children then used to be in the pantomimes as well. Yes.
And where were the pantomimes performed?
Village Hall, Lakenheath, once a year. This was the WI one, and then I joined the local drama and acted with those as well, you know. Yeah.
Did you go on holidays as a child?
No, only before the war. We went to Portsmouth, and my father and mother and uncle and aunt as well, and I was 7. And while we were down there, war was imminent, and battleships and aircraft carriers and sailors were all leaving Portsmouth. And my father had a cine camera, and he photographed all these. And then when we knew war was going to be declared, we came home one day early from Portsmouth, because the next day war was declared, and I was 7 years old then. So no more holidays for me.
Did your family always have cars, or did you
No.
use transport, public transport?
No, we didn't. Going to the seaside once a year with the Sunday school, Methodist Sunday school, was a real treat. That was the only time we'd go anywhere. And one year we had 6 coaches leave, and all the village were out waving to us. And we used to go to Yarmouth. That was lovely. I did go to Belgium before the war. I remember now. I was 4. Because my grandfather was killed in the First World War, George Morley, and mother wanted to go out to see her father's grave because he had a grave at Ypres. So we went to Belgium, and when we arrived at where we was going to stay, 3 children. There was Gilbert, Simon and Marie-Louise. Marie-Louise was 5 and the other was 7 and 11. And they took me off as soon as I arrived, this little English girl, and made a fuss of me. But of course they were talking in French. And I was frightened. I'd never heard that before, and I cried and wanted my mum, so they had to take me back to where we were staying. Right.
Can you tell me a little bit about the shops and facilities in Lakenheath as you were growing up? I've been told there were 8 pubs. Can you remember any of them? Or
10 pubs.
10 pubs?
Yes. We had about 10 pubs in the village. Well, there was the Swan, Lakenheath, near the station. There was the High Bridge, which was just on the Fen Road. Then they had the Checkers, which was starting at the High Street. We had the Bull. We had the Tap. We had the Bell Hotel, the Plough, the Fox, and the Star. And I think there's and the half moon. We had the half moon as well, and I think that's around about 10. So we had 10 pubs, several barbers. I used to have my hair cut at barbers for 6pence, being popped up into a high chair and watching the men shave themselves with a cutthroat. They used to lather, and then they'd have the cutthroat and be pulling their noses to one side so they didn't cut their noses, and I was fascinated by that. And we had quite a few shops, little shops, but we had loads of shops. We had 2 or 3 butchers. We had 2 fish shops, little green groceries and grocery shops and sweet shops. And we had a shop which was Flats, Henry Flats. That was the cycle shop. But they also had a shop there selling toiletries and stationery and all manner of things, toothpaste and those sort of things. But once a year in the cycle shop, which was adjoining, they would sell toys, books, and that would be open at Christmas Eve, so we could go and buy our presents there, which was good because there was no cars in those days, so we had to, or our parents would go down and buy all the presents. That was really useful.
Did you use a doctor or the dentist or the opticians in the village?
We did have a dentist. I think They used to have a dentist in Mill Lane or Plough Lane, and we had one doctor originally, but now we've got 3. And the doctor used to come and visit. He would quite happily come out if you weren't very well, but now we have to go to the doctors unless you're very, very ill.
And what sort of clubs were in the village? Was there a football club or a flower club, or what did people do for enjoyment and
football
entertainment?
club and a cricket, a youth club, of course the WI, and the churches. We had the local church, and then we had Methodist church, Baptist church, and the independent along the back street. So we had 3 churches.
And were you involved with the church? Because you said you went to the Methodist church with your parents. Did you continue with that?
My parents went to the Methodist, and I went there from about 3, a little girl. And eventually I was Sunday school teacher and secretary to the church, and organist, part-time organist, especially for Sunday school children, Yeah, I was quite involved with things. And the Girl Guides, of course.
Do you have memories of swimming in the mill pond?
No, I wasn't allowed in the mill pond. I used to paddle in the Lakenheath Lode, which is now dried up. The mill pond was about 18 feet deep, very dangerous, and I wasn't allowed anywhere near that, so I never did learn to swim. We didn't have any swimming pools at school in those days.
And do you remember the reservoir opening?
You mean the cut-off channel?
Must be.
That was in the 60s. Yes, I remember that, because that's replaced the Lode, and that runs right to the bottom of my garden. Yes, I remember that. And that, because before then, where I live now, the Rookery, it was flooded mostly around about February, March, after the snows had gone, and then it was with water all the way around here, and people used to skate when it used to freeze.
Did you know the Palmer family?
Which Palmers was it?
They appeared to be long lived in the village, and there was 3 of them. Were they related?
There was the carrot Palmers, but I think one of the oldest men was Sam Palmer, who lived in Anchor Lane. I think he was one of the oldest in the village. But at the moment, Mr. Graham Cook is 101 this year. He's the oldest one now. Once a year on Good Friday, we would have or go up to what we call the Good Friday Hill. It was on Maids Cross Hill, Lakenheath Warren, and the shopkeepers would have a wooden barrow, load up their goods, ice creams they'd have and whatever, and they would trundle them up to the Warren, over the top of the hill, and set up the stalls by the side of the road where people could congregate and go up and buy things which we could normally buy anyway. And it was crazy, but they called this the Good Friday Hill in all weathers. And I remember being a little girl once, and it was snowing up there, and I thought, are we mad? But that was just something which we did every year. I mean, and that was, people would congregate and look forward to this. And I've thought since, how silly that they used to take their wares up the hill where we could buy them any day in the street shops.
Why do you think that stopped?
I don't really know.
And what other things did you do at Easter?
Oh, we would at the Methodist Church we used to have on Good Friday we'd have a service, and not songs of praise, but that was something similar, where we'd sing and the readings and things all to do with Easter, and that was an annual thing. We used to practice for weeks for that and have the choir.
And how did you celebrate Christmas?
Oh, Christmas. My father loved Christmas. He always made sure we had a tree and decorated it. And I still use, I still do Christmas here, and I make sure that the tree has got the little angel on the top, which has been coming out for donkey's years. But that was, and we had a turkey. Even when I was quite young, we still had a turkey for Christmas. And that was a present that was marvellous. Yeah.
Do you have any memories of a favourite present you received?
I remember I was fortunate because I had a car, a little pedal car one Christmas. So I'd go round and round Rome in that. And then for a birthday once, I had a little fairy cycle. I think I was 5 or 6, one two-wheeler. Well, my parents didn't know I could ride, and I surprised them by jumping on this little bike and going all the way up the top of the road and back again, because I'd been riding on other people's bikes. My father, when I was still at school, he was the first person to have a television. I'd no idea what this television was, and he was talking about this television, and I thought it was a box where you sort of look in it, but this little television was similar to what we have now, but it was only 9-inch screen. So they had a big magnifying glass to make it into a 12-inch, and it was black and white. And all the neighbours came in to see this marvellous thing. Father was also first to have a radio when he was still living at home himself. He had what they called a crystal set, and they used to have headphones on to listen to it, but the villagers again thought this was a marvellous invention. So he was a pioneer in television and radio. And my father used to do films, and once a year we'd have pathoscope films he'd send away for, and that was what we used to do on Christmas Day and Boxing Day. And Charlie Chaplin was one of the films we used to have. I remember those. And then he would have a drama like Lorna Doone or something like that, and we used to take them to some of the neighbours as well and have a film show which my father would organise. During the wartime, Italian prisoners of war worked with my father, because although father was a master builder, during the war they only allowed one builder in Lakenheath, so Mr. Reg Diver took that. So my father did all the maintenance for the war agriculture, and he had these Italians working with him, and he got very friendly with them, and actually he risked probably prison, Because one of the Italians, Vittoria, he had an aunt in London, and my father contacted his aunt, and she came down to Lakenheath station because where they were working was Christmas Hill, which was right next to the station, and father met her and brought her to meet her nephew, Vittoria, who was a prisoner of war. And the Italians were so pleased with my father because they were Catholics, and they said, Clement, if I be Christian, I be your Christian. And we thought that was lovely. And when the war was over, Piero, one of the Italians, was very friendly, and father visited them with my little sister, and mother went to see them in Italy. And then in 1991, two grandsons of one of the prisoners, Piero, came to visit me at Rookery Farm, Mauro and Ezio, and they still in contact with me after all those years. I still get Christmas cards every year from Ezio and Mauro from Italy, which was lovely. And originally the Victoria camp was tents before prisoners first came, and then they had the huts, which I think are now all gone. But that was quite interesting because that was on the Barton Mills Road towards Barton Mills.
Tell me about the chapel they built there.
And the Italians built a chapel there, which was very, very clever. That was all from odds and ends, and they built this beautiful chapel which they could use for Catholics at this Victoria camp, because they were very clever, and they used to make lots of things. For instance, from pieces of plane which had crashed, they would make petrol lighters and all sorts of things, and my father owned one which they gave him and put Clement on it, a little petrol lighter made from the aluminium from a crashed plane. But they were very, very clever.
Can you tell me, lastly, about these 10-foot high sweet peas?
We used to grow sweet peas, was one of our specialities, and my father used to we used to sow the seeds in the autumn rather than spring like they do nowadays. We used to dig a trench and put soot and manure and all sorts to fertilise them and plant them and cover them with clutches to protect them for the winter, which brought them on early. And then in the springtime we would take the clutches off and water them, water and water. They need loads of water. Stake them, and they grew and they grew and they grew. And one year it was 10 foot high, and all these beautiful sweet peas. So I used to have steps to pick them because they were so high. But that was something unusual.
Lovely. Thank you for your memories today. Okay, thank you.